So hi Daniel.
Hey, how are you?
We're here, it's Namm, and you've got 3 more new products to show us, right?
3, yeah. We've got the Rubicon 2, the Morgasmatron, and the Planar 2 down here. And I thought I'd show you the Planar 2 first. So obviously all of these are kind of evolutions of our designs, and this one in particular is quite a big leap. So we always wanted the original Planar to mesh with some kind of CV recorder, but we never ended up making our own. So we thought it would be a good idea to have one built in. And on this one, you can record quite a long period of time, and at a very good resolution too. Have it loop, have it triggered to an external device so that you can have it synced. But because we have digital control over the analog VCAs, we can also do some new things like mapping the CV of the X and Y to polar coordinates, so you can have things move around based on angle and radius, not just Cartesian X and Y. And we can actually record button presses too, so that with the gestures, we're also recording taps. And there's voltage normal to the input jacks, so on the output, we get basically a quadrature LFO or envelope. So as you're moving this around, those voltages are going up too. So with no sources plugged in and using the XY outputs, you essentially get 6 different CV sources that you can use to control stuff with. So I've got this hooked up right now to a variety of things. It's controlling some pitch shift and feedback on the Rainmaker. It's controlling some timbral things on the Rubicon 2, and it's controlling the cutoff in the Morgasmatron. You get the idea.
So with the recording, is it kind of like cumulative when you record over, or does it just record a new kind of?
You can do, so when you're like, I'm gonna get rid of the trigger here so we could just do a long passage. So if I record like this, I could keep going for quite a while, and then I stop and it'll play back once, could loop it, and let's trigger that. And if I wanted to change something on it, I can do a punch in at some point. Like I can just record into that, but it's not overdubbing because it's only, it's just going to insert it and then, yeah.
So cool. So when that's obviously in like an early prototype stage.
Yeah, and the reason for that is in developing it, there were so many extra controls that we discovered we could add to this, like to do a number of things to do with how the looping is controlled and what you map it to afterwards or before and what gets melted together. So we're going to do a pretty extensive beta testing with this to make sure with our testers that there's nothing that we're missing, like absolutely essential features. So we're going to tweak the UI a bit, but the fundamental technology, it works, like you can hear it. So I think our estimates are ready by Superbooth. That's basically our goal. So up next we've got the Morgasmatron, which is a evolution of our infamous Morgasmatron filter that we worked on with Dave Dixon. And we went through a lot of revisions to get this working the way that we would like, and there's quite a lot of notable improvements and enhancements over the original. So first of all, I'm going to show you the cutoff. We've got a really nice sweepable range. And same thing, we've tuned the Q and the Q drive to be better controls. The switching of the different modes is a totally different approach now. We spent a lot of time working on to make sure that that there's no bleed between the modes, that it's really isolated, and this is working super well. So at its heart, the Morgasmatron is still a dual filter, and right now we're listening to the mix output, which is controlled by this crossfader. So we can go from one side to the other using this. You'll notice some switches up here, and these are to allow us to get a lot more flexibility in how we use the routing here. So for example, I can flick both of these to dry, and now I've got just a regular crossfader. I can switch them both to dry. I'm going to put this into a sine wave right now. Dry, dry, and then I'm going to invert one side. And now, if I modulate the crossfade, so you'll see it's off at 0. That's because this is a ring mod now. So it's just an extra kind of bonus. And then you could actually turn it off dry, and now you're ring modding distorted or filtered circuits. So let's unplug that and go back to our raw sound. And oh yeah, go back to a pulse waveform 2. Okay, right now I'm listening to both filters in parallel. I can switch them into series, and then this one is filtering first, and then this one is filtering afterwards. Go to parallel, we can crossfade between the two. So on this one, you'll notice that there's this little symbol here. This is to engage our distortion circuit. We checked out a whole bunch of different guitar distortions because we wanted to kind of find the best one that worked well with synthesizers. What works well for guitar doesn't necessarily work well to synth and vice versa. And we settled on the Proco Rat. We love the sound of that. And so we use similar chips to what they use to try and get that authentic sound, but then we tweaked it to get more bass response and also to work in the proper yaw rack levels. So I'm going to flip that on right now. It's quite loud. That's with bandpass filter. You get a really acid, gnarly sound. I go low. Still retain all the bass sounds. And if I starve the input, you'll get like pretty cool textures too. So because of this configuration, I could have distorted on one side, dry on the other, and now I have a wet dry for distortion. I can have distorted on this side, and then this side could be the level control for it and the final tone control. So that becomes a really versatile distortion unit in that case. And if I turn this off, we've got no input at all. Both of these will oscillate. And they track 1 volt per octave.
And is the 1 volt, one input is normal to the other side?
That's right.
So.
Exactly. And then I can get some more tones out of it if I distort it. That's just one module making that sound right now. Also good for kick drums. If you put a sharp envelope into it, you get really nice tones because it's not a sine wave. It's kind of distorted. And actually, that brings up another thing, which is when we are processing a sound, I'll just put the saw wave in here. You can overdrive the input too, and then you'll get a little bit more harmonic. So you'll see the red light coming on. So you really have 3 different ways to distort the signal. You can override the input, you can drive the resonance into distortion, and you can engage the distortion circuit there. So quite a lot of tone shaping. And then of course, lots of FM inputs, normals between the FM, normals between the 1 volt per octave inputs. There's voltage control of Q as well. So basically everything you would want to control on a filter is there. and you can use it as a single unit for distortion and with a lot of fine tone control, or dual field, however you want, really. It's just very flexible and fun to play with, and that's the most important thing, is that we want it to be really fun. And kind of getting back to our roots of just making analog modules work as well as possible and sound as good as they can.
So when are you hoping to have it out, and what's
It's
the
ready.
price point?
Yeah, it's actually starting to ship right now. My guys at the office are packing it up, and dealers are starting to place orders. So, yeah.
Perfect. And yeah, so let's have a look at
Okay.
the Rubicon as well.
Rubicon. All right. So this is another classic from us, and quite a beast. Took many years to develop this originally, and we've come up with some what we feel are some really nice enhancements to the original. So right now we're just listening to the pure sine wave, and we'll start with the important thing, which is how the through zero FM sounds. So I'm going to put a sine wave on this Dixie. I'm going to put it into the TZ-FM input, and I'm going to turn up the index, which is the FM depth. So actually, I want to point out something. On the old one, if you wanted through zero, you had to turn down symmetry and then turn up the pitch to match, and that would be your close to 0 point, and then you could modulate from there. But a lot of times, the tracking would kind of fall apart, and it was difficult to sort of get to exactly the point you want. So we have this new control called Symmetry Lock. When I flick it, you're now shifted to a point near zero, but it compensates for it by increasing the pitch. So it's a great way to be able to see the difference between TZ-FM and regular FM. So I'm going to turn this up. You can see it going forwards and backwards without through zero FM. Lush sounds, a lot of complexity there. So there's quite a lot of the waveforms are the same as the original. Lots of little tweaks in there still, but I want to take you to this new section called Warp, and this is why the Rubicon 2 is 2 HP larger than the original, because we had to add CV control over this because it was so cool. So in addition to the Warp, there's also this new waveform called Tri-State Pulse, and you can kind of see the shape there. It looks like a pulse waveform, but the top and the bottom are kind of mirror images and flipped, and it allows us to do something special with this warp circuit. So I'm just gonna, hopefully this isn't too loud. With this warp in the middle, you're basically hearing just a sub waveform. But as I turn up warp, it's bringing in this, it's blending this with it. That's on its own, blending it, and I have 2 octaves to choose from of waveforms here and sub-circuits to mess with. And I can, basically I can modulate the amount that I'm doing this warping, or I can modulate so the warping pushes basically chunks of the waveform up or down based on how it interferes with the waveform, and the pulse width is contracting and expanding them. So that's 2 different ways to animate it. You get really, really deep, lot of harmonics. And then it gets even more interesting if we patch something else into this instead of the sub. So now we're essentially listening to a sine wave. And so now I can push slices of the sine wave up and down. Turn it up a little bit. Animate it again, or I could animate the warp control here. Okay. So we had an issue with the warp, which is that because of constructive interference, it can actually push waveforms greater than 10 volts peak to peak, which is sound louder, but if you want to keep your waveforms the same, we tried this voltage limiting schemes, and it works, but it just wasn't timbrally interesting. So we devised a solution that uses, we're calling it the Squish Circuit. It uses a sort of fixed level single stage folder. Basically anything above a certain threshold is, which is close to 10 volts peak to peak, is folded back in. So as you're pushing these waveforms up, you're folding them back in. There's a trimmer to adjust how aggressive this is. So if you turn it all the way down, basically when you flick it on, the sign kind of remains the same, but anything above it gets folded. But if you turn it up, the threshold is lowered. And I personally like that sound a lot more, and that's what I've set it on here. So that's why you immediately hear that more nasally kind of sound, but it's a lot more interesting to modulate. And in combination with this, when I'm feeding sounds from this into here, using crossfade, we're getting a really, really nice palette of warm tones that we can do a lot with. You need an oscillator source with very rich harmonics so that you can filter them and turn it into something special. And this is, with all these controls, these different ways to animate the waveforms, it's bordering on becoming like a complex oscillator, but it's still definitely a fundamental, solid single oscillator. And it's keeping with our kind of ethos of making things modular. Like you have other things to modulate this with. You have all these building blocks. You can patch this up like a complex oscillator easily, but you could also do so much more with it beyond that. And that's where you could get the really interesting new sounds from.
So with the Rubicon, is that kind of almost ready to go?
So close. The thing holding it up is that we have this new switch, this A position, and this Chinese holiday, so we're waiting a couple months. So then it'll be ready. But the panels, everything else is ready to go, and the development is done. So these two, good to go. This one, pretty soon. That's where we're at.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.